Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Pavitra and today we'll be discussing on the PALS update, Pediatric Advanced Life Support update that came in March 2021, Indian Pediatrics. I'll be linking the journal down below in the description box. So make sure you download and have a copy of it with you when you listen to this lecture. So basically, the update is divided into pre-arrest care, intra-arrest care, and post-arrest care. All right. And there are a few points that are highlighted in each of these components. So let's see them one by one. So pre-arrest, what are they stressing on? Try to avoid arrest. So how are you going to avoid the child going into arrest? Especially in a child with myocarditis, you expect complications to happen. So shift them early to your intensive care unit. Initiate ECMO early, extracorporeal life support early if indicated in order to avoid an arrest. So how does this extracorporeal life support help? It helps in recovery of native heart's function up to 40%. And even if they go on to have a transplant, the recovery is good up to 30-35%, which is a pretty great number. All right. So pre-arrest, the main importance is to prevent cardiac arrest. Okay. So that is the first point. Second point in your pre-arrest care is your fluids. Okay. One of the main reasons for a child going into cardiac arrest is either respiratory component is reduced or your cardiac hemodynamic status is reduced. So one of the ways to improve your hemodynamic status is fluids, correct? So here they have debated a lot about what sort of fluids needs to be used. Theoretically, a balanced crystalloid sounds better than an unbalanced solution because unbalanced solution results in unnecessary hyperchloremic acidosis. That until there is more evidence, use whatever you have. All right. Don't wait for a particular balanced fluid to reach you in order to initiate resuscitation with fluids. Okay. Ideally, a fluid for resuscitation will be your crystalloid rather than a colloid. And among crystalloid, whichever you have balanced or unbalanced does not matter. Just use it. One cannot be recommended over the other. So type of fluid we discussed. Next, how much to give. Earlier, they, the first resuscitation, as much as you can, up to 200 ml per kilos, it can be given. That is and all no more there. Recent feast trials, okay, not so recent feast trials. Lesser the fluid, better the recovery. So do not give too much. And even the previous update said in resource poor settings, you have to give this much, and resource well settings, you can give this much. Now all of those are scrapped. Okay, it's just smaller aliquots of fluid of 10 to 20 ml per kilos with careful assessment post bolus. That is most important. Okay. I'm sorry if you're seeing too many flickerings. Light, I cannot adjust too much here. All right, fine. So it does not matter how much you give. What matters most is you assessing whether the child is responsive to the fluid that you have given. No point in you giving 20 ml per kilos or 30 ml per kilos or 40 ml per kilos without knowing whether the child is responding, right? So you should check for fluid responsiveness. You can do a clinical assessment or you can do ultrasound based assessments. That is up to you. But assessment is important. Whether the child is actually responding to the fluids that you are giving. Okay, so give 20 ml per kgs, irrespective of whether you are in a resource a well-resourced setting or a resource-poor setting. Sepsis survival, surviving sepsis campaign 2020 still has a small difference of of up to 40 to 60 ml per kilos in the first hour of resuscitation if you have good intensive resources, and if you do not have, then restrict it to 10 to 20 ml per kilos with close monitoring. That your PALS, American Heart Association update, says just 10 to 20 ml per kilos irrespective of your setting, with post resuscitation assessment for fluid responsiveness. So now you know what type of fluid to give, how much to give. Now, if the child is not responding, then you need to start some vasopressor or inotropic support. The earlier recommendation was dopamine. Now dopamine is no longer there. We have been switching over from dopamine to adrenaline, noradrenaline for quite some time, and now you have it in writing. Epinephrine or norepinephrine is the drug of choice for initiating in a septic shock. All right. So cold shock, warm shock, yes, you can do it if you want, but There's no how to tell differentiation. This differentiation has been abandoned in this new guideline. So please remember that norepinephrine is very good. Epinephrine is very good. See, simply because what does dopamine do? Dopamine, anyways, in order to act on all your blood vessels, it has to get converted to epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So where will it get converted? It will get converted in your adrenals. So in a child who's having a poor circulatory system, that is not going to go there, right? It is going to get concentrated to your brain and heart. So if adrenal is not going to get your dopamine to your adrenals, then how is it going to get converted to your adrenaline and noradrenaline? Isn't it so? So better give off the active drug rather than give dopamine, wait for it to get converted to adrenaline or adrenaline, then act. It's going to take time. So choose adrenaline or noradrenaline. So this is about pre-arrest. So pre-arrest, what did we see? Prevention of arrest, early initiation of extracorporeal life support, especially in a myocarditis patient. Then fluids. Fluids wise, what fluid to use, how much to use, and if unresponsive, what sort of vasopressors to use. Then intra-arrest care. Intra-arrest care, they have stressed upon airway. All right. So advanced airway during CPR is a must. And bag and mask ventilation is very good in an out of hospital cardiac arrest setting. Okay. So it helps improve the outcome. But similar data is not available for in-hospital cardiac arrest, but out of hospital cardiac arrest, bag and mask ventilation is good. And how much to bag? So now that you have initiated bag and mask ventilation, earlier it used to be 3 to 5 seconds once. Now they are insisting on more breaths. Okay, one breath every 2 to 3 seconds. So essentially, you will be breathing at the rate of 20 to 30 per minute. Okay, so that should be your rate of ventilation when you're doing a bag and mask. But make sure you don't overventilate. If you overventilate, then you end up having hypotension. Why do you end up having hypotension? Because you're washing out all your carbon dioxide. All right. So too much hyperventilation is bad. Remember that 20 to 30 breaths per minute will be your benchmark. One every 2 to 3 seconds. So now that you have started bag and mask ventilation, 20 to 30 per minute, you are going on. Suppose this child needs an advanced airway. What ET will you choose? Prefer a cuffed over an uncuffed tube. Now the recommendations are clear. Previous guidelines, they were like use a ET tube, but now specifically use a cuffed ET tube if possible. When you're using a cuffed ET tube, the important thing to remember is maintaining cuff pressure and using appropriate size. What should be your cuff pressure? Less than 20 to 25 centimeter of water. Okay, so this is very, very important. Too much pressure is bad. Too less is going to result in leaks. You're using a cuffed ET tube. One of the reasons for using a cuffed ET tube is to prevent leaks from happening, right? When you're ventilating the child. So only if you inflate it to appropriate pressures, you're going to prevent leak. If you're inflating it too much, what happens? Then you are going to be pressing upon your child's airway, and that's going to reduce your blood supply. And reduced blood supply is going to result in necrosis, ischemia, and all that. Getting the child out of tube is going to be very difficult. So maintain it at 20 to 25 centimeter of water. So now you have selected the appropriate sized cuffed ET tube. So now you are going to intubate this child. So during intubation, the earlier recommendation was use cricoid pressure. Now there is no role for routine cricoid pressure. So you will use cricoid pressure if you think the stomach is sufficiently distended and you have a risk of aspiration. And if at all when you are using a cricoid pressure, you feel that it is obstructing your airway, remove the cricoid pressure. It is not a must that you need to have cricoid pressure to intubate. Okay, so that is about cricoid pressure. So now you have established a good airway. You are continuing your cardiac compressions. This child is in arrest. We are still discussing your intra-arrest care, right? You are continuing your cardiac compression. So when do you give epinephrine? See, earlier they used to, it was a little bit later epinephrine. Now the early administration of epinephrine carries a better outcome for the patient. So within 5 minutes of arrest, if you can give or if you can start off your epinephrine doses in your resuscitation protocol, then the child has a better outcome. Got my point? So early, less than 5-minute administration of epinephrine from the start of chest compressions in chest compressions. I'm sorry, not arrest. I was also under the impression it was arrest. Now I'm realizing it is chest compression. Okay, please note this point. So from the start of chest compression in your pediatric cardiac arrest is associated with better outcomes. So now you have done everything. Okay, so now you have done everything. You are continuing your compressions. You have started epinephrine within 5 minutes of starting your compressions. Now, how do you know your compressions are effective or not? There are multiple ways to go about it. One of the ways that they have stressed is use the invasive arterial BP monitoring. If you already have it in place, use it to monitor the effectiveness of your resuscitation. How will you use it? Earlier recommendation was just look at the BP. Now they have specifically pointed out, look at your diastolic BP. All right. If your diastolic BP is more than 25 in infants and more than 30 in children, then that means you are doing a good job at chest compression. They have a better survival post arrest. Understood? So use your diastolic BP. What is the cutoff? More than 25 for infants and more than 30 for children. 30. So now you have done all this. Now suddenly mother or father or somebody is coming and telling this child is probably has probably arrested because of an overdose of opioid. Now what do you do? So this is more common in a Western setting than in us. But in case you have such a history, then continue your CPR. You should give an naloxone dose. You should give an naloxone dose, but don't just rely on your naloxone dose to bring the child off of your cardiac arrest. All right. So rest of the care should continue. All right. Importance of routine PR protocol should take priority over waiting for naloxone to take effect. That's all I'm telling. You can administer naloxone in suspected or proven opioid care. Does not proven opioid overdose case, but it doesn't mean that you have to stop your resuscitation to wait for your naloxone to bring the child out of arrest. That does not help. Okay, so now you have done all this and the child has started having a sinus rhythm. Okay, started having a central pulse, started having a peripheral pulse, slowly returning to normal circulation. So post-arrest care, what are the things you can do? Targeted temperature management is something that is slowly coming up. If you can do a hypothermia, you can do a hypothermia in your setting. Hypothermia followed by normothermia, total 5 days protocol you can do. Or if not, maintain normothermia. Because most of our centers do not have the equipment to put bigger children under hypothermia. So if you do not have that, maintain normothermia. That is more important than hypothermia, normothermia, etc. Maintain normothermia in a child. Make sure the child does not have hyperthermia. So temperature. Next, your blood pressures. So it is assumed that you already have an invasive arterial BP in place. If not, place one now. Why? Because post arrest, there will be fluctuating blood pressures. Fluctuating blood pressures will be very difficult for you to make out with your regular non-invasive monitoring. On and off blood pressure measurement will not pick this up and down. So always have an invasive monitoring in place, and your target should be to maintain your systolic above the 5th percentile for that age and height. 5th percentile systolic blood pressure. All right, so you place that monitor to make sure you have an idea of the lability of the blood pressure post return of spontaneous circulation. All right. And what about your targeted saturations? You don't have to maintain too much oxygen. You don't have to come down on too much carbon dioxide. Ideally, normal oxygen, normal carbon dioxide concentration is important. Normoxemia and normocarbia. That is the word, I think. Okay. No hypercarbia, no hypocarbia, especially no hypocarbia. All right. So targeted saturations can be 94 to 99%. So now cardiac, then what about brain? So brain, if you can do a continuous EEG monitoring. Continuous EEG monitoring will help you in detecting non-convulsive status. If the child is having a convulsive status, you will obviously load the child with anti-epileptic drugs. As of now, there are no recommendations for prophylactic anti-epileptic drugs post-arrest. If the child has a clinical seizure, you're going to load the child. But these children who are coming out of arrest have non-convulsive status. So that will be picked up only by your EEG. So in that case, you will be picking it up from your EEG and initiating the child on anti-epileptic treatments. So that is one. Second, it has some prognostic value. Okay, not everything, but some. You need to see the child as a whole in order to say how the outcome is going to be, not just based on one EEG waveform. So if the child is having good sleep spindles, if the child is having normal background activity without seizure activity, then a better outcome. You can, to some extent, say this child may come out of this event with a near intact survival. Suppose this child is having burst suppression activity or poor background activity, very flat waveform or attenuated waveform, then those carry poor prognosis, right? So this is about your CNS. And recovery. Recovery is a very important add-on to your chain of survival. Okay, both for in-hospital cardiac arrest and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, this recovery is added specifically. This is one of the components in the chain of management in your in and out of hospital cardiac arrest. So these are all the changes. So let's run through them quickly. You also have a nice summary in this table. The previous one, what was it? The new one, what was it? You can go through that also if you want. For your exams, it will be a quick revision. So pre-arrest, intra-arrest, post-arrest. Pre-arrest prevent arrest, and in myocarditis, early initiation of ECLS because better outcome. Fluids, what fluids to give, how much fluids to give, what vasopressors to use. Intra-arrest care, you initiate bag and mask ventilation in out-of-hospital cardiac setting. If you have to use rates, it has to be higher than before. It should be 20 to 30 per minute. And if you have to place an alternate or an advanced airway, use a cuffed ET tube compared to an uncuffed ET tube. And cricoid pressure need not be used routinely for all patients when you're placing them on advanced airway. Then after that, airway ache. Then what else did we discuss? Yes, cardiac compressions, epinephrine. Epinephrine, early use of epinephrine within 5 minutes carries a better outcome. Then when you're doing a chest compression, how do you know it is effective? You look at the diastolic BP, more than 25 in infants and more than 30 in children. If it's opioid related cardiac arrest, you're going to give naloxone, but you're going to continue your cardiac compressions and your respiratory pumping. Post-arrest, maintain temperatures, maintain hemodynamic status by keeping a close watch on your intra-arterial blood pressures. SBP should be, systolic BP should be above 50th percentile. Brain-wise, you will be looking at EEG. You will be looking at 1 for prognostication and 2 for non-convulsive status. Then recovery is something that has to be closely monitored for in-hospital and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So that's it about your PALS update. So thank you guys for listening to me. If you found this useful, share it among your students. And I know I have been, I have been taking quite a lot of time between the previous lecture and this lecture. Hopefully we'll be able to meet more regularly. Thank you guys and bye-bye.